It's time for the old Bernie Sanders conversation because he's announced he's going to be running in 2020. And I would say that Bernie has lost me because of his identitarianism. When I saw that photo of Bernie getting arrested during the civil rights movement, I was like, strong applause. Hell yeah, Bernie. There's videos circulating of Bernie being consistent with his views on civil rights and social justice for decades. But something happened. Bernie got really famous. I actually met the guy several years ago, and I barely remember it. It was a book signing for, I think, Dylan Ratigan. It was in D.C., and a friend of mine was like, don't you remember when we actually met him? We were in line for a book signing, and we briefly talked to him, and I was like, oh, man, I barely remember. Because it was a few years after that, I started getting really interested in his campaign and supporting a lot of his ideas. Here's the thing. Bernie Sanders has always been a little too far left for me. When it comes to free education, I'm really rather neutral on it and leaning slightly for free college, like publicly funded college. But before we do any of that, I think we need to overhaul and we need to overhaul these public systems because they're just rife with corruption. But here's the thing. Bernie Sanders in 2016 made a claim about white people not knowing what it's like to be poor. He started to heavily embrace identity politics. And then I'm like, that's too much for me. OK, look, I thought Bernie was an honest guy and he was a little too far left for me, but he was a career politician. And I think that's to a certain extent a good thing. He's not a super wealthy guy. His salary is just shy of $200K. And I'm like, that's fine. And I trusted him. Okay. Then he started pushing this rhetoric about women not getting equal pay. And I'm like, what? You've been, how long have you know women are paid the same thing for the same job. We're talking about negotiations. We're talking about different money for different jobs. We're talking about cultural problems, not governmental problems. Why is he pushing this? Bernie Sanders made a statement in 2016 that the gun debate issue was urban versus rural. And I went, bravo. He's being honest. He's right. People who I've lived in rural areas. I understand why you need guns to protect yourself. And I've lived in cities and I understand why some people don't think they're necessary and it could lead to accidental discharge. So I understand, the urban versus rural aspect of gun control. And I respected Bernie for it. But now it seems like something happened and the dude is just not being honest. Maybe he just wants to win. I don't know what happened. He apparently in 2016 bought a third house, and that's part of the criticism. He wants to talk about how... So let's look at the article. This is from Ash Scow on Daily Wire. She says, flashback, Bernie Sanders, candidates of the poor, ask how many luxury items billionaires should own. He leaves out one important item. Yeah, probably his house. Do we need to start limiting the amount of certain things wealthy people can buy, which would in turn hurt the workers who made those items? That seems to be what 2020 presidential candidate, Senator Bernie Sanders, socialist from Vermont, was suggesting in a tweet sent in April 2017. He said, how many yachts do billionaires need? How many cars do they need? Give us a break. You can't have it all. Okay. It seems like there's something between car and yacht that rich people have more than one of, but I can't quite put my finger on it. Oh yeah, houses. Rich people have a lot of houses. It's odd that Sanders would leave that item off the list. Maybe it's because Sanders himself owns 3 homes, despite railing against the alleged excesses of millionaires and billionaires. How many homes does this person need? Bernie Sanders doesn't own rental property. He's not running a business. Bernie Sanders is a politician. He gets paid by the federal government about $174,000 per year. Bernie Sanders owns 3 homes. Those 3 homes are for his personal use. It's my understanding. I understand if you own 3 homes because you're a rental property manager, a landlord. Some people don't want to save up to buy a house, can't afford to, or they only want to live in a certain area for a short amount of time. There's a lot of reasons that are practical. People would rent, even if they could afford to buy. Renting makes more sense. Bernie Sanders owns these houses for himself. I think that's fine. I have no problem with that. But Bernie apparently does. And this is where I start to think something happened in the past few years where Bernie has just lost. I don't trust him anymore, right? I think he's embracing, he's pandering, hardcore pandering. And in 2016, I supported him before when he first announced, and it was this, ragtag, fly-by-night little campaign with, cheap little banners. And all of a sudden, he swept the nation. Like, boom, people started supporting him like crazy. And then once he got to the debates, the narrative emerged. And then he was talking about equal pay for women. I was like, whoa, what are you talking about, dude? You've been honest on this issue for a long time. You've been honest on gun rights. Now he wants to ban weapons. It's like, what the... Dude, you know what, man? This is why I hate politicians. Yeah, he wants to win. So he's going to say what he thinks he needs to say. Yeah, okay, fine. I'm not playing that game. In 2016, after Sanders had lost the Democratic primary to former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, but while he was still popular with the Democratic base and espousing anti-wealth sentiments, the Vermont senator purchased a third home with his wife. according to Vanity Fair. The summer home on the shore of Lake Champlain cost around $600,000 and was purchased using the funds from selling a home owned by Sanders' wife's family. Sanders also owns his home in Burlington, Vermont, and a home on Capitol Hill in D.C. I purchased my first home in 2017, and I can say from experience that houses on Capitol Hill are not cheap. Not that $600,000 home is cheap either. Well, I'll say one thing for sure. Bernie may have purchased on a plan with zero down, and he's paying a couple grand per month to own the house. I'm not slighting the guy for owning multiple homes. We don't know his circumstance. His wife certainly has money, and when you're as old as he is, yeah, maybe you want to own a couple houses. Bravo to his success. I have no problem with that. But I do think it's silly when he criticizes how many cars do they need. And then Ash makes a good point. There's something in between cars and houses. Look, I own one really crappy car, and it's like kind of falling apart. I should probably buy a better one, but I don't really need a better one. Oh no, I own a car and a van. The van is for work though, and I'm trying to get it built. But the issue is Bernie legitimately criticizing the success of individuals and calling out the billionaires? How many yachts do they need? Yachts aren't necessarily that big or expensive. They can be small little dinghy boats. Well, maybe dinghy is a specific term. I have no idea. I'm not a boater or a boat person. But Bernie seems to be pandering in this instance. And I feel like if you're going to claim you can't have too many cars, but at the same time having multiple houses, it's another sign that I feel like Bernie is just trying to win. And he's no different from any of these other politicians. I'd like to see a politician just tell it like it is. And that's why people think, Bush and Trump win, because they just say it. Trump had no problem saying on the debate stage that he was a billionaire who paid politicians for favors, and people respected that. They did. Bernie seems to be just trying to pander to the left so he can win the presidency, and that makes me feel like anybody willing to do that is not someone I'm willing to vote for, plain and simple. Sanders, according to Vanity Fair, is still one of the poorest members of Congress, with a net worth of about zero. It's probably negative, according to a roll call ranking, placing him at 423 out of 535 members. His 2014 tax returns revealed that he and Jane had made about $200,000 that year, the bulk of which came from Sanders' $174,000 Senate salary. Jane, who previously made about $160,000 a year as the president of Burlington College, retired in 2011, Vanity Fair wrote. Since then, however, Sanders' income has exploded. In 2016 and 2017, according to Fox News, Sanders and his wife earned more than $1 million a year. Holy whoa. In 2016, most of that amount, $885,000, came from an advance and royalties for his book, Our Revolution, about his failed run for presidency. Sanders entered the 2020 presidential race last week and raised nearly $6 million for his campaign in the first 24 hours, more than any other candidate reported in the same time frame after announcing. But Sanders' entrance into the race is now causing other Democrats to distance themselves from the word socialism, a word Sanders throws around approvingly. And I think it was... who was it? Was it Beto? No, it wasn't Beto O'Rourke. It was Kamala Harris. Someone asked her what separates her from the other candidates, and she says, I believe in border security, throwing shade, over at Beto and Sanders and these other personalities. But I also want to point something out. Bernie is now the 1%, okay? And that's, according to this article, $1 million a year. Yes, that makes you the 1% and then some. Bernie said in an interview for Vox in 2015 he does not believe in open borders because that was a Koch brothers proposal. But where are we today? Bernie Sanders supported the Secure Fencing Act back in, I think it was in 2006. I believe he did. I don't know where he stands today on the issue of border security. I respected him because he refused to say abolish ICE. It seems like Bernie's still in there, but something happened and he's a changed person. I do not fault him for his success. But if they're going to mention that in 2016 and 2017, he and his wife earned more than $1 million a year, but he's going to come out and tweet how many cars and houses do you need, and he is now a millionaire who owns multiple houses, something doesn't quite fit here. And this, I'll say this. When he said up on 2016 that white people don't know what it's like to be poor, I was sitting surrounded by a group of individuals, and we were all kind of like just dumbfounded because many of us were hardcore Bernie supporters, and we believed he was honest. And when he said that, we were like, that is the most nonsensical thing I've ever heard. Most poor people are white. That's insane. I have friends who are crack addicted, poor white people who grew up in the ghetto. Why would he say that? It felt like a real betrayal, and it felt like he started playing up to these identity politics for the sake of winning. Who does he think middle America is? Now, Hillary Clinton, I think Bernie still stood a chance, but over time since then, It just looks to me like Bernie has become wealthy and successful with multiple homes, and he's threw away what made him a real person. Maybe it's because he became rich and he tasted some success, and that changed who he was. I don't think so necessarily. I think you can be down to earth and still wealthy, but it certainly seems like, I don't know, it seems like he's just not being honest anymore. So they mention at the end, Kamala Harris announced her bid for the presidency last month, told reporters she would not call herself a democratic socialist. Klobuchar is trying to paint herself as an alternative to the radical left, saying at a town hall that she would turn down socialist solutions to the country's problem. I don't know much about Klobuchar, but I gotta say, her really embracing moderate policy, I'm leaning in her direction. Like, yes, be a Democrat. Get rid of the weird socialist nonsense. Sanders, despite being 77 years old, has tapped into today's leftist youth with an increasingly see socialism as a solution. Well, it's not. And the main reason I was really interested in Bernie was not because I agree with him as far left as he is, but it was because he felt honest. He was an experienced politician who fought for civil rights, and he was kind of being down to earth and honest and willing. He was an independent too. And I was like, okay, but now pandering. So you know what? I'm out. I wouldn't vote for him at this point. So it is what it is. Probably not. Maybe one of these other Democrats. We'll see what happens. But stick around. I got one more video coming up in a few minutes. I will see you then.